Sorry to be whistling, but my voice is not going to do it, as you know. So welcome to the Boxo10x10. Sorry, I'm a bit of a crier. Yeah, this is the 10th anniversary of the residency. It's actually about 8 months past, but it seemed like a good time to celebrate. Thank you for all being here. I see so many people who played a role, past residents, supporters, community members, new people. It's just awesome to have you all here. And I'm very excited that we're going to do this panel discussion with Mary Gladstone as our moderator. We've known each other quite a long time since Mara's days at the museum, and she's now the head of program and deputy director at TESX. And Kelly Berg, Ben Cuevas, Jim Toia, and Heather Johnson, all past residents. There are other past residents in the house, so please say hi to them along the way. I see Constance. There are other people, please raise your hands. Also, really want to thank I have an executive committee who are awesome and help with all aspects of the residency, and that's Danielle and Stephen. So thank you to them. And I won't go on any further. Thanks for all being here. Thanks for putting up with these. We just thought it would be better to do it indoors than out in the wind. And afterwards, there'll be tacos and drinks and stuff back where you were before, so please hang out afterwards.
Well, hi, I'm Mara, and I was really delighted when Bernard asked me to moderate this conversation between Ben and Jim and Heather and Kelly around the topic of engaging place. So I first met Bernard soon after I'd arrived in the desert. Soon after he launched the Boxo residency program, I think in 2013 with Danielle. And like a lot of us here, I was, a new transplant to the desert. And like a lot of us here, I have found friendship in Bernard's kind and thoughtful persona and genuine inspiration in the persistent presence of Boxo projects in the cultural ecology of the desert over the last decade. This experimental project, BoxoPROJECTS, where residencies and exhibitions and 3 triennials plus this are shared and explored in a safe and welcoming creative community, has been a stable and powerful presence in our arts community and has played a seemingly modest but very critical role in dispelling the abstract mythologies and misconceptions about the desert, sharing knowledge, and that's through sharing knowledge about the desert with your friends and experts here, and making Joshua Tree and the Morongo Basin a destination for visitors and a home or second home for others for whom one visit is not enough. And so I know that in my personal and professional life, I am constantly asking these questions of how and why and with and for whom are we engaging with the place where we are. And I'm very grateful to Bernard for setting a standard in creating a residency and exhibition model that is constantly challenging itself, constantly challenging its artists and its communities to ask these questions and actually providing tools to start exploring the answers. So I hope you'll join me in thanking Bernard for dreaming up Boxo and to congratulate him on his first decade, hopefully. Part of this panel, but he's going to have to run around with tacos, so hopefully we can a little bit later, because this is the nature of things. And in his generous spirit, he wanted to do a panel with artists who have done residencies over the years. I can't recall who was the earliest one on board here, but Heather's project, yeah. So, and what's really interesting, and I kind of pre-interviewed, was that, for a lot of artists who come here, this is not the residency is maybe the first sort of in-depth exposure to this region, but it becomes this place that's visited again and again. And the idea of putting a residency in your home is not one many of us would do.
Just to say, Heather and I actually shared the house. Back in the day when I had the artist rooms in the house with me. So they are the brave ones.
Yes. But it's been really incredible to see how, it's become a home for a lot of different people, a lot of different formations, combinations of people and family, creative families. So that's a very cool thing. So I know many of you, the four of you actually have never residenced together, and so this is the first time meeting. And I was gonna just start the conversation with a question for both Ben and Kelly. So convenient, you're next to each other. Because I was looking and talking about what you had done. It seemed that when you came into this residency and when you came out of it, there was a lot of straight up visual thinking happening, and it's in your practice. So Ben is an LA-based designer and artist, but in his art practice he works with textiles and crochet, weaving, and Kelly is a painter who's moved into sort of more a sculptural painting practice. And so it seemed that the residency really had this transformative, truly dimensional impact on your practice. Like for Ben, you came in, we talked a lot about just being in the space and seeing these mountains and connecting, hand to land, from eye to hand to land and back again. And so I wonder if you could just share with us a little bit about what happened for you when you started this residency.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really big shift for me in terms of subject matter, because I've been working with ideas around the body and identity, but I was so drawn to the land here. I mean, it's just so striking, and there's really nowhere else like it. And I would come out here on the weekends during my residency and take photos on this vintage camera that had been gifted to me from a queer elder friend of my family. And I would take photographs and then go back to LA and make these knit and woven wall hangings based off of the shapes of the land. And I really wanted to find a very queer way of representing the land. So the stitch used in these pieces is called faggoted fringe. Faggoting is a lace-making technique, and I just love the linguistic, serendipity of it. So a very queer way of representing my experience engaging with the land here.
And then Kelly, we talked a little bit about how there was this, and I think this happens for a lot of us. Some of us are oppressed by this sort of the desert. It can be very overwhelming, and it's that sublime feeling where you're just well, I don't know if this is the right thing for me. But for you had this sort of, it expanded your way of thinking about the picture plane. Can you share a little bit about what happened to you when you were here and what you did? Because it's kind of interesting how
definitely. I mean, this residency, it had a profound effect on my art and really changed the way that I thought about my paintings. And, when I began thinking about the residency, I was making these paintings of pyramids emerging from cracks and rifts in the earth. And so what I was interested in doing was actually bringing the paintings into 3 dimensions, and so bringing physical portable pyramids into the landscape of Joshua Tree. And I was really interested in kind of the forces that formed this land. So geologically, even volcanic forces back in the day, and the pyramids kind of representing this kind of new energy emerging from the rocks. And so what I ended up doing with the residency was taking the portable pyramids around in the landscape. And my daily studio practice out here was just going up into the rocks right here and taking the pyramids with me. And it became kind of this practice of portable land art that I was kind of witnessing, taking pictures of, and then I would go back to the studio and start making paintings based on those new experiences. And it really actually shifted the way that I was painting. So I started incorporating geometric forms kind of into the landscape, and the pyramid became kind of a centralized form in the work. And so I started seeing things that I had never seen before in the landscape because of this whole practice, and since it really has transformed my work. So
That's cool.
As you mentioned, if anyone has a question of any of the artists, please feel free to. I just have notes and questions, so any questions, feel free to jump in. Heather and Jim, so your practices are really interesting. They're very different, but they're much more connected to sort of like systemic inquiries. Jim, I think you could speak a lot better about sort of the scientific, the soil. You really want to explore the soil and engage with the experts here who could share with you that knowledge. And then Heather, I was just thinking a lot about Heather's project, which I think has since concluded, was like a 10-year or more project of, or one of them, where you motorcycled, you traveled, right? And so there's this kind of mark making you're doing with your body, and then you came here, and as you traveled here, you left these fragments, these embroidered fragments on leaving sort of a different kind of mark on the land and with people, right? But I liked seeing your brand new installation here, and thinking about mapping and these weather systems and this different way of thinking about the landscape. Well, I'd love to, if you could, Heather, if you could share a little bit about, we talked a bit about your journey here at the beginning. So when you first came to the desert on your motorcycle.
So this opportunity to come here, I came here semi-cold, only with some really vague impressions of this part of the world collected from a previous road trip that I took 20 years ago, in a moment when the landscape was really burned. It was very, very hot and more not as populated as it is now. But with this invitation, I had started riding motorcycles only a few years prior and had this fantasy of riding across the country by myself. And so Bernard's invitation to come do the residency, I created this whole project that would involve moving through the landscape, collecting experiences and memories and conversations, and in exchange for those experiences, leaving something behind that was a part of myself, that took time to make, that took energy, that represented my own body as a motorcycle part, because the motorcycle becomes part of your body when you ride across the landscape. Motorcycle parts are literally, it represented my own body, and they were pieces of myself that I gave away. And then, I kept going from that point on. I did the residency here. I started making this elaborate body of hand embroidered work, incorporating mapping and motorcycle parts. And I continued the project for about 7 more years through 3 additional journeys, one of which took me all the way down to Buenos Aires. And so this residency was just a huge tipping off point. It was gave me the impetus to do everything that I am now. That piece is different. It is not necessarily the piece that is in the studio that I made. It's a big paper installation. Sorry, that piece on that over there. The piece that is in the studio in the corner, it's a big 20-foot by 8-foot installation that also kind of pulls together experiences from traveling that I've had. I think a lot about, as a motorcyclist, I think a lot about machines. I think a lot about systems in general, mechanical systems that keep us comfortable and alive, in relation to natural forces that exist despite, what we do to the environment. So that thing in there is this sort of cathartic psychological exercise that brings together all these different things that I'm fascinated with. the systems in question in that piece, the inspiration comes from the Edmonston pumps, these 60-foot, gigantic pumps that are capable of sucking an Olympic-sized swimming pool of water in 6 seconds from the California aqueduct, and they push them over the mountains into LA and the desert. And I'm just really fascinated about my fantasy, as yet unrealized, is to go and be in the presence of those things and to hear them, to know what it feels like to be witness to 80,000 horsepower. But it's like, how much power does that take? How much power does it take to run those things? There are lots of dichotomies that I'm interested in, finally. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking now.
Jim, can you share with us your what you sought to explore when you came out here, and the experts you ended up consulting and talking to?
Yeah. So it was, I work with nature all the time, and I try to find processes and structures that lend themselves to, enamor and wonder, and then I investigate them. That's the typical way that I work, right? Ooh, mushrooms. Let me find out more about them. So when I was invited to come to Boxo, and I live on the East Coast, so it was a very foreign, location for me. I thought, here's an opportunity to work and talk about the environment a little bit in a more activist way, and I needed to find out more about it. So Bernard was generous enough to introduce me to Mark Wheeler, who is a biologist who lives here and has spent decades moving through the desert and sees every inch of the desert around here. And Mark was kind enough to look at my work. We talked for a while, and then he took me on a hike, which kicked my butt. He's about 12 years older than me, and by the end I was just dragging and fearing that I was going to collapse in the desert and he was going to leave me there. But he didn't, and we spoke a lot about the different parts of the environment that were at risk. And I wanted to kind of grab one of those things and try to work with the community or with the local the people who are coming to visit here, who might not understand so much about what this incredible place is and how delicate and how vibrant at the same time this landscape is. So after searching around and spending some time, I was really interested in cryptobiotic soil, which is called desert crust, which is an incredibly thin land part of the desert that is vibrant. It's got like 5 or 6 different living organisms to it, and one of them is mushroom mycelium, which I'm very interested in. And so I started really kind of digging into understanding that a lot more, and having this opportunity to come out to a place that I didn't know at all, and start to really think about the impact of us on the landscape. More and more people coming out to the desert, and the environment and the predicament that we're in right now. I thought it was a great opportunity to kind of push the investigation of this material. And what happened was probably 3 different avenues of investigation that culminated in one right now that's out there, which is imagery on top of this boulder form that is the cryptobiotic soil, scanned through an electron microscope, and then printed on mulberry paper that forms the outside skin of the boulder form, and the inside skin being mushroom mycelium, which is probably a lot of you know is it's just an incredible medium that has a remarkable amount of applications in the real world now.
I don't know what that is. Can you show us what that is?
Yeah, mushroom mycelium is it's actually the body of the mushroom. It's the root structure that lives underground and in tree bark and in the sections of trees. And It's this incredibly fine fibrous tissue that lives in all over the world, everywhere, just about. And if you dig up an inch square of forest floor, there's about 10 miles worth of mycelium running through it. That's how fine it is. And it can be used to build structures with. You can grow it very easily, and it's becoming more and more interesting as a building product. They make mycelium bacon now.
Wow.
Mycelium leather. You can build it as building blocks. So it's just a different, interesting alternative to conventional building materials which take a lot of energy to create this stuff. You just mix it with some wood pulp, add some water, let it sit and grow for a while, and then all of a sudden you've got this incredible structure to build. So, getting off subject a little bit, but there are these wonderful things out there that are around us all the time that we can learn and take from in nature that we typically haven't over the last 200 years. And I think we're all at the point where we need to understand that we should respect that a little bit more and use it. So this is an opportunity for me to kind of bring that back to the community in a way that allows us to be aware of it, maybe, and maybe act on it a little bit more. So it's just an opening for a conversation that happens. And a lot of fun crawling around on top of a boulder and ripping it apart, and ripping the paper apart and putting it back together and hoping that it works, which it actually did.
I should mention that, so Ben's work are the two wall hangings here. And then there are actually some of these smaller folders of Jim's or newer corners over here. Okay, so I guess I'm wondering, what was one of the most surprising things for you in the desert, whether it was like a person or an experience? Was there a particular moment or person or thing that surprised you when you came out here and spent deep time here?
I mean, for me, I think it was like materially, I had a really good surprise because I was trying to figure out how to hang the pieces and what I would use for the crossbars on the top of them. And I really wanted to find something here, so I invited a surprise in that way. And Bernard's neighbor over there has this amazing salvage yard, and we spent a day going through there, combing through, looking at all the found wood, and we're having such a hard time finding anything. And then these perfect ladders surprised us out of all of this awesome mix of material. And they're just these beautiful old weathered ladders that have been out in the desert environment for I don't even know how long. So that ended up becoming a really nice surprise element way of just figuring out how to make the piece materially.
Any other surprises when you're drawing out here or spending time there?
I mean, way too many to, I mean, the entire thing was about a stream of surprises, But I found that once I got here, I became really, really preoccupied with the topography, the shape of the landscape, erosion, the way that weather systems affect the shape of the land, and then also how people live here, how people relate to it, how people commit to it. There's something really, really astonishing to me and beautiful about people that I encounter anywhere who choose to live in a place. As a nomad, as somebody who grew up moving around constantly my whole life, this place has a particular pull, I think, for folks, and is not easy to live here. And I mean, I tried to live here myself a few times, and for various reasons, it just didn't stick with me. I ended up migrating to Houston, where I live now, with my partner. Well, we don't, never mind. And so it's all a string of, I mean, in a given day, the way that the light changes in this place, it's, it's a constant set of surprises, even when the sun goes down and you see the stars here in a way that you don't see anywhere else. All of these things filter into into everything that I make and think about, and this place I came here 9 years ago, and again, it set me off on a particular path that I wouldn't have taken chances. It takes a lot to cross borders in countries that you do not know, amongst people and cultures you're not familiar with. It takes a lot to do that, and I feel like this place gave me a certain strength, and inspiration to carry stuff forward and to do everything I'm doing now.
This interest in topography is something that's present in all of your work, and it's kind of impossible to not think about, right? Thinking a little bit about your paintings are very layered and very invested in that kind of mark making, and have you spent time in any extended periods of time in any other landscapes that have informed where you are now?
Yeah, I mean,
Elsewhere?
actually, I was kind of thinking about, again, the other question too, like what surprised me, and I think it was actually realizing how connected this landscape was to other landscapes that have really informed, who I am as a person from way back when, my early interest in geology that, really began in the Badlands of South Dakota. I grew up in Minnesota, and it was very extreme weather there, and kind of this experience in Joshua Tree really took me actually back to my childhood in a way that I didn't expect, because it was kind of solitude with nature, and during that time I was doing a lot of travel to the national parks and really these places that, again, like the light is ever shifting and these geological forces. But I think what surprised me here was the presence of light and how that changed the landscape so much. Mm-hmm. And so seeing the reflections in the mirrored pyramids that I was building, I think too it made me want to layer the paint in new ways and just work with color in a new way. And the other place that has really inspired my work is the Big Island of Hawaii and Kilauea volcano. And I keep returning to that place, and I've made work on the Big Island, a series of prints, and just being in the presence of molten lava, actually seeing a volcano erupting, and I've seen it through many stages. What surprised me is, Joshua Tree has a very similar kind of energetic pull for me as the Big Island. There's something here in the landscape. And one of my favorite kind of moments of the residency was actually, Bernard had told me about Amboy Crater, which is further out in the Mojave. I'm like, wait, a volcano in the desert? And I was like, we have to go. I was like, I have to take my pyramids there. And so that was a really kind of main moment. I ended up making a painting about that experience, and me and Bernard did a hike early in the morning and up all around the crater, and it was quite the hike because you can't do it in the heat of the day. There's tons of warning signs, so we're making sure going over the black lava, and I brought my pyramids there, and it was really quite an amazing experience. And so I think connecting that, it's a 10,000-year-old, it erupted 10,000 years ago, and then it made me think so much of the Big Island of Hawaii, another major inspiration. So for me, I think it was almost now I've started to kind of connect these geological places that have informed my work to almost this kind of larger mapping of my own artistic journey. So that's kind of fed into the layering processes, even in my paintings, which is very interesting.
So everyone has mentioned how Bernard's secret knowledge and connections to people have really helped, or just given shape to your inquiries. Bernard's a really big part. Your knowledge of this region is really wonderful. And I don't know, are there any other people you met? Heather, did you meet any people here who you really?
How many people in here do I know? Oh my gosh. I mean, I can't, I don't want to name people because there'll be someone I'll leave out, you know? I mean, when I first got here, I mean, one experience that keeps popping out into my head, for better or for worse, you know, is the day that we spent on the base. You know, we took a tour of the base, and it was just incredibly fascinating to be given all of this information. It was like, you know, stuff that seems privileged. Information that we were entrusted with, and I was just really sort of transformed by a lot of the things that I saw, the processes that I saw, the rationales behind, you know, the existence of this place, and that in contrast with the ways of thinking that so many people in Joshua Tree have. I mean, it just revealed this site as an incredibly complex area with people from so many different ways of looking at the world and opinions, and the fact that a military base can exist here in Joshua Tree, you know, peacefully, I guess, more or less, amongst in this community, you know, that I think of as being, you know, pretty progressive, I guess. I mean, you know, these are things that I really appreciate. I appreciate contradictions and dichotomies, and I love thinking about the psychological tensions that exist between things that make life really, really interesting, that create millions of gray areas, you know, that take out the black and the white. You know, this place exemplifies that. You know, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's where I went with it.
I wanted you to talk about that transformation experience on the base, actually.
So, yeah, that was a huge one. And that one of many.
So as we've reflected on what you've done here, and this is also a question for you, Bernard, I'd love to know where you're going next. You know, it's really great that we've been able to see work that was produced from the residency, but also some new works from some of you. Would love to know what you're thinking of next, and also Bernard, what's next for Boxo? Well, we can save you for last.
Okay. Well, I can contribute. Bernard was, you know, in his vast knowledge of and connectivity to everyone in this region. When I started thinking about the project and the kind of educational part of it, I thought land trusts and, you know, conservancies, land conservancies in the area that might entertain some ideas about, you know, some kind of educational model. So I've constructed these pieces, which are these hexagonal forms, and one of them is sitting outside somewhere. It's a mycelial form, as maybe a building block, a structural, architectural building block. So I'm in conversation right now with a couple of different organizations out here about doing something that will be an element in the landscape that could be an educational tool that is kind of architectural. So so that in itself is like, that's a whole nother endeavor, which is has been opened up to me. That, I mean, I've done some other public work on large scale, not a lot, but this is an opportunity for that to happen in a way that it hasn't happened for me
And to
before.
connect with like non-art audiences.
Yeah,
Showing
yeah,
work
in an
context.
educational way. And I mean, there's art's that language that brings so many different disciplines together, right? We're the conversation that everyone can have, and we're also, everyone's got an opinion about, you know, art. They feel very comfortable in saying, oh, I like this or I don't like that, right? And that's fantastic, because it's an incredibly democratic opportunity for everyone to engage, right? And that open conversation, that relaxed kind of freedom that we have to have that conversation in the public forum, it's really, really important, and everyone has it. So to bring this opportunity for a fourth grader or a septuagenarian to say, look at a piece and say, oh, well, yeah, I think,
You can make a house out of that.
that's a great opportunity. So I'm really, I feel really fortunate to be able to have those conversations and look forward to that endeavor.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I love so much about Boxo and this residency is that Bernard creates an environment that just really fosters openness to experimentation and the ability to change and be open to new ways of making. And that was just something that I really took away from my experience here. This big shift in my work from working either representationally with textile, making forms that reference the body specifically, or more in terms of concept and using text and playing from ideas of the internet before. This was my first time abstracting any sort of representation of landscape. And that idea of abstraction is carried forward into my new work that I'm doing called non-binary code, where I took the word non-binary, I translated it into binary code. I identify as non-binary, by the way. And then I make an abstracted textile wall hanging out of that code that I translated to knit and purl stitches. So just having the freedom to, work in a different way than I had before really opened me up to thinking about working around ideas around identity and the body more abstractly. And that's carrying forward into my work now.
Yeah, and I would say also for me, I think, Boxo gave me this room to explore kind of new mediums even, and just new ways of making work. And it really informed what I've done since. Even though I was just a resident in 2021, it's, totally transformed my work and my practice. And my paintings, I've continued kind of using the same compositional structures and things that I figured out here in the desert, and I've applied them to kind of the other landscapes that inspire my work. And what's really interesting is the pyramid project has continued on, and really from placing the pyramids in the landscape here in this kind of portable size, I started really thinking about those ideas of portable land art and also leaving no trace in the landscape. And that's something I'm thinking a lot about, being such a fan of the national parks and, a way of interacting with the landscape with my art, but again, leaving no trace and having it kind of be an in the moment experience. And so this led to actually a recent project that was just 2 weeks ago. I was the art and nature artist for an outdoor installation at the Laguna Art Museum. And I actually brought my pyramids to Laguna and placed them into the landscape. These were larger pyramids, and they were very much inspired by kind of the geology of Laguna. But it really brought me back to Boxo and what I, found out here from placing the pyramids in this landscape. And so it felt really special to bring my pyramids that were originally, from the residency back into the studio. And then, just 2 weeks ago, I had my project, which was called Pyramidion, in Laguna Beach, and there's still a couple pyramids inside the museum there. So it really led to a monumental kind of realization of this whole 3 dimensions and sculptural outdoor works interacting with the landscape.
Heather, where are you going next with your work?
I'm more and more interested in investigating infrastructural systems that we depend on. I spent last year. I spent 6 weeks in the Grand Canyon for residency there, and learned about the water, about where water comes from there, and how it's delivered to the 6+ million people who visit the Grand Canyon every year. And that crazy feat of engineering that basically takes water from a single spring and pumps it up to one rim, and then gravity feeds it down through a pipe and then pumps it back up, another mile to the other rim where it's stored and then fed to all kinds of systems that give water to hotels and, everyone else. These systems that we don't think about very frequently, that we take for granted, they're engineered really precisely, are incredibly fascinating to me because they're delicate and they're fragile. This particular system breaches, up to 20 times a year, and every time it does, people have to conserve water, stop taking showers, etc. And you folks are, I'm sure, very familiar with that problem living here. So what is that sweet space between the need to have comfort and have our water delivered to us, our air conditioned and cooled. How do we move forward when these same systems very often contribute to climate change, and the reasons why we keep needing more and more and more, and to develop newer, more innovative ways of solving the problems that these systems themselves actually help generate. It's not so much about solving the problems, but about investigating the psychology of this and the psychology of how we exist as humans. In that, why do we keep creating these dichotomies for ourselves? It's a question. That's all it is. And the work that I'm doing now is focused on that. I'm probably going to start looking at the sewage systems in Houston, and looking at flooding mitigation systems and things like that. Because in Houston, we also have problems with water, but we have too much of it. And Henry and I both went through Hurricane Harvey. And that's a very different kind of experience, but a scary one. And we have that. We have a lot in common. Every environment in this country and in the world has these critical issues in common, and I think it's worth spending time on. So that's where I'm going.
Yeah, certainly droughts in one place and floods in another.
Yeah.
We all know this is all connected.
Yeah, it is.
The reasons for these things.
Yeah.
What is next for Boxo? Continue on. Are there any new buildings you're building?
Not currently as planned, but firstly, I haven't pointed out this fantastically, but as soon as you start to name people, you miss out people. So I just wanted to go back to that for a second and mention Julie Wyman, who's here, who's on the advisory council and a big supporter. I mean, there's so many supporters in there, but just people who are technically part of the Boxo setup. And of course, Amy here. Because I couldn't see Amy back there. Amy is the most creative resource and problem solver. And you get it. So, and then I'm also happy to say we have recently welcomed a new advisory board member, and Barbara Gotthard, who is a former resident here as well, well known to a lot of people in the room. Recently we were very happy to welcome a person a lot of people know as well to the advisory council called Danielle Segura, who's going to bring, we've never really had a development lens, and this is something that COVID was very good for a lot of organizations in kind of clarifying your model and helping you figure out, where you were succeeding and where you weren't, and how to move forward. And Danielle has recently come on board. She's not here, unfortunately, today because she recently had some surgery. But she has done a little research project talking to some funders. And one of the things that has come up, and I haven't had the chance to discuss this yet with Stephen or Danielle, this all happened just before the situation. So this is something we'll be sitting down and talking about. But was the idea of expanding the residency. There was at least one person who said, are you limiting it by this one artist model? And you know, the one artist model has always been there for, firstly, just logistical purposes, but also this idea of pairing people up with the community. And whereas I think I was presented as being very networked, it's really a community that just gives a lot and says yes a lot. And that's what brought me here, you know, that just the community. But this idea of expanding and having more than one resident here at a time, and the idea of collaborative residencies has come up. So that would be a way to either have 2 residents here at a time from out of the area, or to start pairing artists with local artists and do collaborations, more formal collaborations. Every artist project here, as you've heard, has basically been a collaboration with a local person, but not someone who necessarily identifies as an artist. The triennial is a model where we have 6 local and 6 regional or national or international artists come and work at the same time, but not necessarily together. And there's somebody in the room who I won't identify right now, who actually wrote to me about a possible collaborative idea. It's amazing how these things come up and then people just live into it. So that's one idea, is how to expand here. And then also I think we've had some performance art artists here of various sorts, but not many. And recently, again, I've just had some people bring some very interesting ideas about performances and documentation of performances and things. So we've always been open to many different varieties of work, but having a bit of focus on diversifying, what we present a bit more, and more events here that people can come to, programs that people can come to and enjoy, because that's what keeps this community rotating. So there have been several terrific organizations that have opened in the last few years here, doing a lot of programming, and it's bringing a lot of life to the community in a good way.
Well, that sounds really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'll be back. But thank you so much, Bernard, for sharing that, and thank you to